Hi CIS27. In this video, I'm going to talk about Unit 9 Lab, which we will be looking at network vulnerability. So in this lab, you will click a link to go into Practice Lab, and we are going to look at vulnerability for the network, starting with network footprinting. And using nmap is an essential tool. If you haven't used it before, you will need to do that for this lab. So in this lab, you are going to use Kali Linux, and you can make sure that you would turn on this particular virtual machine. So on the right hand side, make sure that you go to the Kali Linux and power that on. So once you do that, you complete the first step and the virtual machine will be enabled. So Kali Linux will take a little bit of time to get set up. And once your virtual machine for Kali is on, you will log in using your root username and password. Then you would go into Kali, and Kali has nmap installed. Now, the version that you can use in the Windows environment if you wanted to run this particular tool is Zenmap. And you can download Zenmap and be able to do that to run it on your Windows environment. But for our lab, we will use the nmap. Then after you select the application, you would need to put in the target address. Okay. So here what you want to do is you can use the nmap to find the port details for a certain part of the network. And nmap on Kali Linux, you can run it directly into the terminal, so it will open up and you can type in nmap, target address, or a group of hosts that you wanted to use, and you wanted to output that into host.txt. So we wanted to gather the information and output it into a text file in that we can be able to go back later and review. Then it's going to ask you to go into LeafPad, and in Kali you can use LeafPad. Once you open LeafPad, then you can navigate to the host.txt file, which is the output from the nmap application that you had used earlier. And LeafPad is basically a text reader. It's like using Notepad in Windows and be able to open up your host.txt file. So after that, you will be able to open up the file, and in the file, it's going to list the information about the host. It's going to list the port information. It's going to list the protocols and so on. So once it scanned the port for each of the device, like it's because we issue it with a group of hosts, it's going to list individual hosts and the port that's used by that host. So in step 8, then you are going to go back to the Kali virtual machine, and you are going to use nmap. In the terminal, you're going to use nmap with an option. And the -O here allows you to identify the operating system for a specific group of hosts. So when you're using the IP address like this with the /24, you can actually check out a group of hosts in that segment. And again, we wanted to update host.txt so that way it would write it to the text file. So it's a good practice to really output your scan information into a text file. So you need to wait a minute, and then you are going to go and again open up the LeafPad, and then you are going to look at the output from that scan. So then it should give you the information about the operating system. So once you open the text file, then you can go to host.txt file, and you would be able to get a report of the operating system. So for example, it's going to look like this. It's going to say Windows 10 or a type of operating system that's run on those machines. So then you would review the report, and it shows here in the screen capture that the .20 would be Linux. So you would look at the IP of the individual IP report, where it would tell you which host is running which operating system. Then in task 2, you are going to use the Windows version of nmap. So now Zenmap is also can be used with the graphical user interface using Zenmap. So in Kali, you can access Zenmap through the application. So very similar to nmap, you're going to find that the interface for it, you can put in your command like what you've done in your terminal. So with the nmap, you can put in the options for it and to do the intent scan, and it will be able to scan the actual host. So after you use Zenmap in Kali, then you are going to fire up your Windows 10 virtual machine. So we're going to go to the right and we're going to power on Windows 10. And in Windows 10, we are going to run Wireshark. And Wireshark is going to give us the traffic information for the system. And Wireshark is usually, you would see that with the fin icon. Then after we run Wireshark, we are going to get the capture, and we are going to evaluate the capture. So when you use Wireshark, you would have to identify the interface, like Ethernet, the type of adapter that you're going to use to capture that traffic. And Wireshark is an open source application. You can download it and be able to run it on your Windows machine at home. And so with this, you would need to specify the interface that you're going to use to capture that traffic. Then in Kali, you're still going to run the Zenmap. And as you run the Zenmap, the Wireshark is going to capture the traffic that's happening when it's scanning using Zenmap. So what you're doing is you're using a network sniffer to sniff out the traffic of a Linux system that's running Zenmap. So as it scans, the traffic is going to be captured, and you're going to go back and evaluate the traffic. Okay. So in the Wireshark, you will see on your Windows 10 virtual machine, you will see the traffic that's generated by the Kali Linux machine when it was scanning. Okay. So then you would look at the traffic and details that from the capture. After you stop the capture, you will be able to evaluate it. So it shows you can stop the capture, and then you can filter out specific traffic by clicking the filter option. So if I'm only looking at the TCP, I can go ahead and put in my filter details like TCP to be able to evaluate only TCP traffic. Stop the capture on the Windows Wireshark, then we are going to go in and we are going to filter and specify and look for synchronization and acknowledgement traffic. So here it tells us that Zenmap port scan would require to have a SYNACT sequence and acknowledgement packet. So that way it would be able to send the reset teardown connection. So what we want to do is, in the case where if you have a potential attacker scanning your network using something like nmap or Zenmap, what you need to do is you can monitor your network and look for a specific type of traffic as it would be illustrated in your practice lab when you complete this exercise. So here, what we see is we are going to look for the RST that would be happening when the system is scanning using Zenmap. Then back into Kali, we are going to again click on the target box, and we are going to look at the group of hosts for that segment. So when you put in the target, what it's going to do is going to scan the entire group of system. Okay, so now your target will become a group of systems instead of just one target like we previously done. So here, what you would see is it's going to scan starting with the .127.0, and it's going to move forward. It's going to look for the actually active host. Then you're going to wait 3 minutes for the scan to complete. Then you are going to view the details. So when you click on the specific host, what you would see is you would see the details on that host. For example, the port that is open for that host, and with that port we would know the type of service. So when you look at port 21 like this, you would see that it's going to be FTP. So with FTP, you would also be able to evaluate what kind of files that's being used for that particular FTP login. Then we can look at port 80, that's going to be HTTP. And then also other ports that would be open for Windows services. So here it shows us that there's some remote session with VNC for Tiger VNC, and then also using 445 for workgroup, that's also vulnerable, NetBIOS, and Windows RPC. So then what you would see is you would see the details with the specific protocol. And so when you expand on that port and that protocol, it's going to tell you the details for that. Okay. So a way that we can look at information a little bit closer is to look at the result from a scanner like nmap or Zenmap. And for Zenmap, you would have the interface where it would show the details for the information instead of using nmap where you would have to output some information into the text and be able to read it then. So then if you click on the fish eye, which gives you the topology. So topology is a layout of the network connection, and it should show you how specific systems are connected based on the IP. So then you would see how many systems are connected and how that would be pertaining to that particular network. So it maps out, right, the nodes, and each node would represent the system and how that system is connected on that network. So then you would look at the host details, and it would give you the summary of the number of ports that are open, the closed ports, how many ports that were scanned for each of the hosts, and then it would be when it was last boot or specifically turn on, because then we would see how the system is being used, especially with the server. They don't reboot it very often. They reboot when it's reconfigure or refresh. So then it would tell you the type of operating system that's used and when it was last booted. Okay, so these type of details would be sometimes utilized by attacker against a certain network. So they normally would use scanners to look for vulnerability, like with specific ports, specific services, OS, updates, and so on. So the version of the operating system is important. The operating system tells us, right, if there was updates. And also the version of the operating system tells us if there's vulnerability. So if you're looking at some of the operating system that was dated, or if there was not a lot of upgrade to close out some security vulnerability, attackers or unauthorized intruder, they would take advantage of that to gain access to the network, possibly through the vulnerability, or to use the vulnerability as one of the area to really target that particular system. So as we can see here, you can look at the details of the host, the port information. And then in exercise 2, you are going to again scan for packets using Wireshark, and you would then use packet sniffer, which is Wireshark. And when you look at the scan, you would then see how we can evaluate specific protocol, the type of packets that we would capture in that session. So when you open up the capture that was saved, you can look at the details for that particular capture. So we can capture network traffic for a certain amount of time, save it as a file, and then revisit it. And when you open it up, you can filter it based on MAC addresses or MAC resolution, looking at specific type of traffic coming from a certain source. So now in this step, what you're doing here is you are looking at a recorded capture. That means that we save that, we open it up, we would identify and look at the conversations that were happening with that system. So when you click on statistic and conversations, you would then be able to evaluate how many packets that were sent from a certain source to a certain destination based on the given address. And then statistically, we can analyze it, the type of IP, right? The type of ports that's used, the type of protocols that's being used for that particular capture. So here, what we would see is we would look at different type of version addresses. So version 4, there are 15 listed. Version 6, there are 4 listed. And then TCP and UDP protocols, the type of protocols under each category. So it gives you the overall summary in statistically, and also some details in specific address. So on step 6, you are going to select an address, and that will be the .18, and you're going to evaluate that. So for the address, what we're looking at is we're looking at the type of conversation that this particular IP address is actually being active in. Okay, so then on step 7, we are going to click on the tab called TCP62, and this allows us to look at the traffic from a specific port with port 162 for this particular IP. Okay, so here what we would see is we would see that port, the number of packets that's being exchanged, the size, and then specifically for this particular IP address, as it was having many different conversations throughout the capture. So then we would look at the information and then look at the summary page next. So in the summary, after you assess all the details, then you're going to go ahead and go through and answer the questions to your best knowledge for different types of attack, how you would determine the type of attacks, and so on. So packet sniffing and network printing is part of the information gathering part of an attack that will be generated. So from an attacker standpoint, they would want to gather as much information about the network, sniff out the packets, but then on the network defense side, we can look at how we can monitor that, and we can detect any kind of scan or network footprinting that's happening with our network. So this shows you on how you can use Wireshark. You can also use nmap or Zenmap to look at vulnerabilities in the network. and how to really detect this type of scanner from a network sniffer. And so hopefully you will be able to get a little bit more understanding on how to utilize these tools, these monitoring tools and assessment tool for network protection purposes. And this concludes my video for Lab 9. If you have any question, please make sure you let me know or contact me. When you complete with the lab, don't forget to click done so that way your lab grade will be updated. Thank you for watching this video. Have a wonderful week.